Good afternoon to all of you. I'm not sure, this being a hot afternoon, we having had lunch to our heart's fill, whether it is a good idea to go to sleep or talk about poetry. Yeah, I know. Instead of talking about Sanskrit poetics, I take Bhoja Prabandha as a pretext to discuss certain aspects of Sanskrit poetics, both from the point of the Rachanakara, person who composes, as well as from the point of view of a connoisseur, the reader or the audience. So, I will not be starting with Sanskrit poetics, concepts of rasa, bhava, alankara, etc., but discuss them as the occasion arises. I have chosen this text, Bhoja Prabandha, for the purpose of discussion during these 5 or 6 sessions which I might be giving. I have chosen this text basically because the Sanskrit, it's a text which is a combination of Padya and Gadya. I'm sure not many people are versed here, well versed with Sanskrit poetry, Sanskrit verse, the nature of a Sanskrit verse, etc. A Sanskrit verse is called Padya. Padya comes from the word Pada. Pada is a foot. So every Sanskrit verse has 4 feet. It is called Chatushpadi. Pada is feet, Chatush is 4. So Chatushpadi is a term for verse. Chatushpadi is equal to Padya. Bhoja Prabandha is a combination of verse as well as prose passages. The Sanskrit is not very difficult in the prose passages, but the verses are one of the choicest verses in Sanskrit literature. The story is quite simple. I am starting from not from the commencement of the story per se, but a little further, because the initial portion is not very poetic. The poetic portion of Bhoja Prabandha starts when Bhoja assumes his kingship over Dharanagari. Bhoja is the son of Sindhula, and Sindhula, when he dies, when he is on his deathbed, he tells his brother to take care, his brother Munja, to take care of Bhoja. Munja covets the throne and therefore doesn't want Bhoja to occupy the throne. When Bhoja is around 5 to 6 years of age, he Munja asks one of his chieftains, Vatsaraja, to take Bhoja to the temple of Bhuvaneshwari on the outskirts of Dharanagari and kill the young boy. However, Vatsaraja is so enamored by the tejas, by the lustre in the face of this young boy, that he does not want to kill him. Bhoja, however, knows the intention of Munja, his uncle. He knows that he wants to kill him. So before he dies, or before he believes he is going to die, so he writes a verse with his blood and hands it over to Vatsaraja. Tells him to hand over this verse to Munja after Bhoja's death. Vatsaraja doesn't kill Bhoja. He takes him to his home, hides him somewhere, and takes this verse, gets a false head, a sham head made by adept artisans, and shows this false head to Munja, tells him that this is the head of Bhoja. And he also tells him that before Bhoja died, he wanted you to see this, he wanted me to hand over this verse to you. So when he reads the verse, Munja is so overtaken by repentance that he decides to consign himself to fire. It is at that time that the truth is revealed to Munja that Bhoja has not died, but he is safe in the hands of Vatsaraja. Bhoja repents for his mistake and leaves along with his family to the forest for his Vanaprastha, and then Bhoja assumes office as the king. It is at this part that the actual poetic quality of Bhoja Prabandha starts manifesting. There is a Bhoja being a patron of several poets. He himself was a great poet. He has written two important texts on Sanskrit poetics, Saraswati Kanthavarana and Sringara Prakasha. In Sringara Prakasha, he tries to establish that there is only one rasa, that is Sringara. All other, what we call as the remaining rasas and the bhavas, are only find meaning only when they are under the umbrella of Sringara. Be as that may, Bhoja has also composed one of the best champus. A champu is a combination of padya and gadya, prose portions as well as versified poetry. Poetry in Sanskrit is called as kavya, and kavya has two manifestations. It could either be padya or it could be gadya. Poetry could either be versified or it may be just plain prose. What is important is it should have certain poetic quality. So not everything that is in the form of verse, this is a common misbelief among people that everything that is versified is poetry. In that case, Ayurvedic texts should have been considered as poetry, because Ayurvedic texts are mostly composed in versified form, but that is not the case. Or on the other hand, Banabhatta has composed his Kadambari and Harsha Charita in a prosaic form. So that should have been considered not in a prosaic form, as prose. So that should have been considered not as poetry but just as mere prose. But then Bana's Kadambari or Kalidasa's Raghuvamsha share a poetic quality that is not present in Ayurvedic texts. Bhoja has written this Champu Ramayana, which is very faithful to Valmiki's Ramayana, in a Mishra form, a combination of Padya and Gadya. Other than that, Bhoja has also written on several other secular subjects. For example, on how to build ships, Rajamartanda, a work on Ayurveda. So many other texts are attributed to him. This Bhoja Prabandha doesn't have a lot of historical value. There are a lot of poets who are mentioned as being patronized by Bhoja. Historically, they were not of the same period. You have Bana and Kalidasa, and so many other poets who we know, Vararuchi, etc., who we know for sure didn't live were not contemporaries. But then, as a fanciful work, it is very enjoyable. I shall read out few passages and also explain to them, translate them in English. Tatah kramena panchashatani vidusham vararuchi bana mayura rephana hari shankara kalinga karpura vinayaka madana vidya vinoda kokila karendra mukaha. These were the poets, and poetesses also. Vidya is a poetess. She is better known by her name Vijjika, as Ganesh sir had quoted one of her verses in the morning. She even challenges Dandi. Neelotpaladala Vijjikam ma majanata vruthaiva dandina proktam sarva shukla saraswati. Dandi, in his Kavya Darsha, the first Kavya Darsha is a work on poetics. The first verse of Kavya Darsha is Chaturmukha mukhamboja vanahamsa vadhurmama manase ramatam nityam sarva shukla saraswati. Here, Sarva Shukla is one of the names of Saraswati. It's also an adjective here. Sarva Shukla is one who is white throughout. Saraswati it symbolizes whiteness. She is like like a like a swan, like a female swan. A swan is associated with a lake of lotuses. A swan rows around a lake of lotuses. It glides around the lake of lotuses. The face is often compared to a lotus. We also say that Saraswati lives in the face of Brahma, just as Lakshmi lives on the chest of Vishnu. Gauri occupies the left half of Shiva. In the same way, Saraswati lives in the four faces of Brahma. The four faces of Brahma together form a cluster of lotuses. And she is gliding through the lotus-like faces of Brahma as if she were a swan in a lake of lotuses. So this is Dandi's description of the goddess. He calls her there Sarva Shukla, entirely white. Vijjika takes offense to Dandi describing Saraswati as Sarva Shukla. She is not Sarva Shukla, she is not all white. Why? Because Dandi didn't know that I existed. He doesn't know about my existence. How am I? I am Nilotpala Dalashyama. I am as dark, I am as bluish in my lustre as Nilotpala Dala, as the petals of a blue lotus, blue lily. If he had known me, he would not have called Saraswati as Sarva Shukla. The suggestion is that I am the actual Saraswati, and Dandi is mistaken in calling Saraswati as white. He should have called her as darkish in complexion. She is not white, she is dark, and I am Saraswati. So, Vijjika there is a beautiful way in which Sanskrit poets proudly declare about their competence. This is one such instance. In another verse, the same Vijjika, Eko bhun nalinat tatascha pulinat valmikataschaparaha te sarve kavayah prasannamatayah tebhyah kavibhyo namah arvancho yadi gadyapadya rachana chaturyamatannvate tesham murdni vahami vamacharanam karnata rajapriya. They were great poets in the past. One was born from an anthill, that is Valmiki. One was born on an island, that is Vyasa, Dvaipayana. Ekobun Nalinath. There was one who was born from the lotus. So the first poet is Brahma himself, having created the poetry of Vedas. So Ekobun Nalinath. There was a person who was born from the lotus. He is a poet. There was a second person who was born from an anthill, that is Valmiki. He also is a poet. A third person was born on a island, and that is Vyasa, and he also is a poet. All these three are poets. Vijjika is telling that she can only declare these three people as poets. There are no other poets after Vyasa. So Arvancho, if people who are contemporaries compose poetry, then here is my left foot, which is I am ready to place my left foot on their heads. So she is so confident of her poesy. There is also a second meaning here. Tesham murdhni vahami vamacharanam. Tesham murdhni. So, Tesham murdhni vahami vamacharanam. Tesham is on their. Murdhni, heads. Head. This is not heads. Vaha is eye place. Vama is left. Charana is leg. Foot. I place my left foot on their heads. So though it's not heads, it's only head in singular. It's okay when you say in a group, you can use a singular to convey a group. So when I say head, it means heads here. So read in one way, this means Vijjika is so proud of her capacity as a poetess that she doesn't care for any other poet. She is ready to place her left foot on their heads. Read in a different way, it means Tesham Vamacharanam Murdhni Vahami. not tesham murdni vahami vamacharanam. The second way of writing the same, Sanskrit, the syntax is not very, it's not very tight as it is in English. So you could read the same murdni vahami vamacharanam as tesham vamacharanam murdni vahami. It also, at the same time that it shows the pride of the poetess, it also shows how humble she is, because the second meaning is their left feet, their left foot, murdhni, on my head I will place. So I will place their left, means I will place, it also means I will put on my heads. Humility. So she is mentioned here as Vidya. I think there is also another verse quoted in Subhashitas, Subhashita Granthas, about how the sun's heat, where does it disappear in the evenings? Where does the sun disappear? Where does the heat of the entire day disappear? And she tells that it disappears into the heart of those people who are lovelorn. So people cannot sustain an evening without their beloveds. So people who are lovelorn suffer a lot during the evening, and so where has the sun gone? The sun has gone into their hearts. So these are the people, these are the poets whom the poet mentions as being in the court of Bhoja. The poet is Ballala Sena. Vararuchi, Vana, Mayura, Rephana, and etc. Evam sthite, when this was the situation, kadachit vidvadvrinda vandite simhasanasine, when Bhoja was seated on his throne, Kavishiromano Kavitva Priye Viprapriya Bandhave Bhojeshware. How is Bhoja? He is Kavishiromani, the best, the crest jewel among poets. Kavitva Priye, he is fond of poetry. Viprapriya Bandhave, he is also fond of wise men. When Bhoja was seated on his throne, Dwarapala, the gatekeeper, came and told him, Deva, O king, Kopi Vidwan Dwari Tishtati. There is a wise man, there is a pandit who is waiting at the door. Then the king told him, Praveshayatam, bring him in. Ityagnyapte, when the king told like this, Dakshinena Panina Samunnatena Virajamano Vipraha Praha. The wise man, the Brahmin, entered, lifting his right hand up as if he is giving a benediction to the king. What did he say? Rajan Abhyudayostu. I'll later tell you that this verse is in a meter called as Shardula Vikridita, a very bombastic meter like Sragdara. These are long meters, and when you immediately want to make an impact on others, it is better to compose a verse in a long meter than in a short meter, and that is why he chooses a long meter. If he had chosen a Anushtup where there are just 8 letters in each line, it would not have made so much of impact. He chooses Shardula Vikridita because at the first instance that when we want to make an impact on others, it is better we are bombastic. So Rajan Abhyudayostu, O king, may you prosper. There is a conversation between the two. The king tells, Shankara Kave, I am happy that the poet who enters first, who is described as first entering into the court of Bhoja, has the same name as mine. I am also Shankar. Shankara Kave, Kim Patrikayamidam, O Shankara, O poet Shankara, what do you have in your hand? What is this written? What is this piece of paper that you hold in your hand? Padyam, this is a poem. Kasya, on whom? That is the king asking. Tavaiva Bhojaniprate, on whom else could it have been? I can't praise any other king in front of you. Bhojanupate, Tavaiva, it's on you. Tat Pathyatam. There is another reading also for this, Papatyatam. Read it aloud. Here the reading is Tat Pathyatam. Then read it. Pathyate, yes, I will read it. But then there should be something has to be, you have to see that something is in order before I start reading. What is that? There are ladies around you who are swinging their arms to fan you with their yak tails. So these are called chauri bearers, chamaragrahini, who are on either side of the king and who fan the king with fan the king with yak tails. So he is telling these beautiful women on either sides of you, Aravinda Sundara Drisham, whose eyes are like lotuses, they are fanning you, and as they fan, the bracelets in their hand is making lot of noise. And if I were to recite a poem in front of you, recite a verse in front of you, you would not be able to hear it properly, because the noise of these bracelets will prevent you from understanding the meaning of, or even hearing to what I am saying. So see to it, ask them to shut up in a way, ask them to stop fanning you, so that there is some silence around when I am reading, when I am reciting my verse. What is important here is, in the morning, Ganesh sir was speaking about 4 types of abhinayas: Angika, Vachika, Satvika and Aharya type of abhinayas. Aharya is to do with stage props, etc., which is not very important in poetry. The 3 other types of abhinayas are more important. Of that, Angika is the reaction we show as a consequence of our mental states. So, for example, crying because of our sorrow. These have to be, if they have to be described, see, on a stage, you could actually see a person crying, actor crying. But if these have to be brought into text, then it should be only through the words of poet indirectly. So the poet has to say that such and such a person shed tears. You cannot have a person with skin and bones in the text to cry for you. The poet has to indirectly explain that such and such was the anubhava, such and such were the expressions of that particular character. On the other hand, Vachika Abhinaya is verily possible in the text. The poet needn't tell that such and such a person told like this. He can make the character himself tell these words in direct speech. So, one of the from these anubhavas, we are able to infer the mental states of those characters. So now, when I say this, when the poet is using Vachika Abhinaya to say Etasam Aravinda Sundara Drisham Dakchamarandolana Udvellat Bhujavalli Kankana Janatkarakshanam Varyatam, there is a particular mental state that is working behind this external speech. So what is that? It is basically the mental state of Garva. So the poet wants to show that he is in a greater position than the king. The king has to put a stop to his paraphernalia if he has to hear to his poem. So his poem is at a greater status than the king seated on the Simhasana. Again, you can see here, but that pride of the poet is never revealed through the actual use of the word pride. If the poet had just told, if Ballalasena had just told that Shankarakavi was very proud, it doesn't make any impact on us. It's like saying something is sweet. It doesn't make any impact on us unless we have the experience of tasting that sweet. In the same way, when the author has to give an experience of a particular mental state to the reader, it cannot be done by just naming that particular mental state. You cannot just say that Shankarakavi was very proud. That will not make any impact on the audience. What will make an impact is to describe the anubhavas and the vibhavas, the causes for such mental states and the resultant reactions for these mental states. Again, in order to make an impact, it is better. What makes an impact when somebody tells something? It is first the words that go into us, and it is later that the meaning comes. So, when you see Udvellat Bhujavalli Kankana Janatkara In Kankana and Jhana, and again in Kshana, you have na repeated again and again. Ud Vellad Bhuja Valli. So you have Vellad and Valli, the two las being repeated, the Samyuktakshara of two las being repeated. Again, Aravinda Sundara Drisham Andolanath, you have na and the being repeated. Why is the poet using such devices, such shabdalankaras, such why is he playing gymnastics with words? Why is he using such alliterations? Because through alliteration he can make an immediate impact on the king. The king may be able to understand the purport of what the poet has told a little later, but sometimes when we hear a verse itself, it makes an impact on us irrespective of the meaning of the verse. Swachandochala Dachakacha Kuhara, which Ganesh sir had read out this verse in the morning. Swachandochala Dachakacha Kuhara Chate Tarambuchata Murchan Moha Maharshi Harsha Vihita Snananni Kannayava Vidyadudya Dudara Dardura Dari Dirgha Daridra Drumad Droho Dreka Mahormi Medura Mada Mandakini Mandatam, or Unmilal Leela Nilot Paladala Dalana Moda Medasvipura Kroda Krida Dvijali Garududita Maruts Phala Vachala Vichihi Ete Nakhani Shakha Nivaha Navaharit Parinapurna Drumali Vyalidho Panta Shanta Yathapatika Drisham Dattaragas Tadagaha. So when you hear to this verse itself, you might not know what its meaning is, but it still makes an impact on the hearer. So the poet, having seen the king for the first time, had wanted to make maximum impact on the king, and that is why he took recourse to such gymnastics. And later, what is the verse actually that he read out? Yatha yatha bhoja yasho vivardhate sitam triloki mivakartum udyatam tatha tatha me hridayam viduyate priyalakali dhavalatva shankaya. So here I come to a concept called as Kavi Samaya. Kavi Samaya are poetic conventions. These poetic conventions do not have any, there is no reality associated with them. There is no real correspondence in the world. But then these are certain facts that are commonly agreed upon by poets. They are not true in the sense of truth, but then these are certain facts which poets agree not in the sense of thinking that they actually happen, but then they, having agreed that, they use it for some, to make some other impact. Let me give an example. There is one poetic convention of the swans being capable of separating a mixture of water and milk. So many of you might have heard it. A combination of water and milk, when given to a swan can separate water from milk. That is one Kavi Samaya. There is another Kavi Samaya of Chakravaka birds separating from one another in the evening. So Chakravaka birds always are known for their fidelity in love. So they are very attached to each other and never separate. It's only in the evenings, every evening, when the sun goes down and the world is filled with darkness, that they can't see each other, and though the other mate might be close by, they think that they are separated eternally, and throughout the night they suffer pangs of separation. It is with the rise of sun that they again meet. So this is another poetic convention. You cannot actually test whether this is real. Surely Chakravaka birds don't experience Vipralamba Shringara in the same way that we do. They don't experience love in separation in the same way that humans do. But then this is a poetic convention. See how these two poetic conventions come together in the author of Raghavendra Vijaya. Raghavendra Vijaya is a Mahakavya on the saint Raghavendra by Narayanacharya. And in one of the sargas, in one of these cantos, there is a description of the evening. And as a stock description, usually Sanskrit poets describe about how Chakravaka birds separate and suffer the pangs of separation. So there is the moon that has risen in the sky. The Chakravaka birds don't like the moon because the rise of the moon signifies that they are separated. The moon is white in color, so he is like a swan. the sky is like a lake. Because of the expanse of the lake itself, the sky is also expanded. The sky is blue in color, the lake is blue in color. Sky is dark in color at night, but then again the lake could be seen as covered with weeds and therefore dark. So the sky is like a lake, and on the lake of sky, the swan, that is the moon, is gliding slowly. And when a mixture of milk and water is kept in front of the swan separates the milk from the water. The Chakravaka birds are so in love with each other, are so inseparable, as if they were a mixture of milk and water. The moon separates the Chakravaka couple. It is like the moon, who is like a swan, separates the mixture of water and milk in the form of the Chakravaka birds. So the Chakravaka birds are like a mixture of water and milk, and the swan, that is the moon, separates this mixture of milk and water. So individually, these are just facts. Individually, the fact that these are just facts that the Chakravaka bird, the mates separate in the evening. Again, there is another fact of the Hamsas being able to separate milk and water. Padyam aduna na smaryate. Na maya etani padyani shravyante iti na maya chintitam. But then these are two individual facts that the poet brings together because of the pratibha as if molds these two facts together to create a third idea. These are called as Kavi Samayas. There is a long list of Kavi Samayas that poets use. One of the Kavi Samaya here is that Yashas, fame, is always white in color. Fame is always white, and if fame is white, you can pretty well guess that infamy should be black. So, Kalanka, Ayashasu. Ayashas will be black. If Yashas is white, Ayashas is black. This idea has been exploited thousands of times by Sanskrit poets, lakhs of times in fact. There is this verse in Sriharsha's Naishadiya, where Sriharsha's Naishadiya is a story based on Nala and Damayanti. It's a long Mahakavya of 22 sargas, but the entire story is not told in 22 sargas at all. It is only till the marriage of Nala and Damayanti that the poet has told. In one of these sargas, there are suitors who have come to marry Damayanti, and Saraswati herself has come as a handmaid to introduce these suitors to Damayanti. When she some question no. So whenever Damayanti is taken in front of a king, Saraswati describes the king in beautiful verses, so that she can make an impact in the mind of Damayanti, and Damayanti can select that suitor. So in one of these verses, the goddess tells that there is a Triveni Sangama, as if, that is created in the battlefield. Why? Because this king, when he conquers his enemies, the battlefield is full of blood. Blood is red in color, as is the river Shona. And the king's Yashas, the king's fame, is white, as is the river Ganga. And the enemy's infamy is black in color, as is the river Yamuna. So all these are poetic conventions. There is a convention that Ganga, though it might be sullied to the maximum extent, is still white in color. And Yamuna is now twice dark as she was explained by poets. So poets say, according to poetic convention, Yamuna is black and the river Shona is white. So as if a configuration of these three rivers, as if a confluence of these three rivers has occurred. So this verse by Shankara Kavi also plays upon the poetic convention that Yashas, that fame, is white in color. But the poet is sad that the king's fame is white in color. Why? The more that Bhoja's fame becomes white, the more that Bhoja's white fame spreads throughout the world, the more it is bad for me, because my wife, who is quite young, now appears old because her locks have turned white. So when everything is turned white, this poet's wife, her locks, her dark tresses have also turned white, and she now appears twice her age because her hair has turned white. And why has it turned white? Because the king's fame is white, so everything has turned white. Similarly, my wife's dark tresses have also turned white. And the king gives him, the king has made a vow that for every akshara that the poet tells, for every syllable that the poet uses, he will give him 1 laksha gold coins, 1 lakh of gold coins. And now he gives him 12 lakh gold coins. Why? Because the verse is composed in Vamshastha, where every line has 12 letters. So, as I told you, in Sanskrit metrics, there is a rule that there are 2 types of meters, the details of which again Shatabdani sir will go into. One group of meters are called as vrittas, where the rule is that each line has to contain a specific number of syllables, specific number of aksharas, specific number of letters. Not just that, but then these letters have to follow a certain pattern of short and long syllables. Maybe you will remember having read about this in your primary classes if you had taken up Sanskrit. So this verse has 12 letters in each line. Yatha yatha bhoja yasho vivardhate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 12 letters in the first line. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 12 letters. This half ma should not be, this is a half ma, and you should not count it as full. So you shouldn't count it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Similarly, 12 letters in the fourth line. This follows a pattern called as Vamshastha. So there is a particular, if you have just 12 letters in each line, that will not become Vamshastha. There should be a certain pattern of short syllables and long syllables. So in this Vamshastha, the rule is so this is the rule. This is a short syllable, this is a symbol for a short syllable, and this is the symbol for a long syllable. So the first syllable should be short, the second should be long. So this pattern should be repeated in all the 4 lines. So for example, people might think, how is it possible to compose verses like this if we have to be always, if we have to concentrate on the number of syllables? It might appear to be very labored and very mechanical, but that doesn't happen. It's people who don't know the rhythm that think that it's very difficult to compose Sanskrit verses because all these rules are there. If these rules were so difficult to learn, then you cannot imagine Valmiki having composed Valmiki and Vyasa having composed lakhs of verses. If that was possible, you must understand that there is a different way of understanding this rhythm. It is not by remembering this formula that you remember this rhythm. What I do, and most of our friends do, is to use nonsense syllables in these places. So the rhythm for Vamshastha would be nana nana na 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 na. That is the rhythm. Even simple verses which you might recite daily, Ya kundendu tusharahara dhavala ya shubra vastravrata, has 19 letters in each line, and the rhythm for that is na 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 ya kundendu tusharahara dhavala ya shubra vastravrata. Are you able to make a connection between the two, between the nana nana which I am telling and actual syllables being put there? So it is in this way that Sanskrit, it is by remembering this tune and remembering this rhythm that Sanskrit poets are able to compose verses. It's not that they keep account, they put this formula first and then match syllables according to that. That will become very mechanical. But then this rhythm will be so a part of yourself that I tell this from my own experience. There are times when I compose verses in my dream, and even in my dream I wouldn't make a metrical flaw, because the rhythm is so much a part of myself, or so much a part of Sanskrit, generally of Sanskrit poets, that they would never make a metrical flaw. They cannot compose a verse without it being metrical in a way. So it's very difficult for us if somebody would say compose a verse which doesn't have any meter. Composing with meter is much more easier, and it's part of ourself to an extent that it becomes unconscious. So this is the rhythm of this particular chandas or meter. Then based on the same idea, I would like to read out two more verses before I close the session for today. The idea is basically that fame is white in color. So there are, based on this particular poetic convention, you can have numerous ideas, and two other ideas I would like to discuss. Very funny ones. It might appear funny to alien ears, but for those who are Sanskritists, it doesn't appear actually funny. It appears very serious for us. So the idea basically is that the king's fame has flooded the universe. So imagine a situation when everything is white, because the king's fame is white. So everything in the universe is white. Then what can happen? Then what will be the situation? Maharaja Shriman, O great king, Jagati Yashasate Dhavalite, when the world is made white because of your fame, what happens? So many difficulties arise when the entire world becomes white. Paramapurusha, that is Vishnu, what does he do? He now has to search for his milky ocean, because all oceans have now become milky. All oceans look white. Payahparavaram Paramapurushoyam Mrigayate. Paramapurusha is Vishnu. He Mrigayate, he searches for Payahparavara, he searches for the milky ocean. What does Shiva do? Because all mountains have become white, he is searching for his Kailasa. And because all elephants have become white, Indra searches for his Airavata. Kapardi Kailasam Karivaram Abhaubam Kulishabrit Kalanatham Rahu. Rahu searches for the moon, because moon, everything being white, it is difficult to spot the moon. Kamala Bhavano Hamsamaduna, and Kamala Bhavana, that is Brahma, searches for his swan, which is his vehicle, because all birds now appear white. Continuing on the same idea, much more at a further level, Neerakshire Grihitva Nikhila Kagatatir Yati Nalika Janma. Now everything has become white, and you can see here that so many poetic conventions have been mixed together. The poetic convention of the swans separating milk and water, and the poetic convention of everything being white, made white because of the king's yashas, king's fame. Now everything having become white, all birds look alike, and Brahma wants to spot his swan among those birds. It's a very difficult task, because all birds, you cannot spot them by their color. Now what does he do? In front of every bird that he meets, he places a mixture of milk and water. So that whichever bird is able to separate, that is the swan. What does Chakram Dhritva tu Sarvan Atati Jalanidins Chakram Dhritva tu Sarvan, it should be Takram. Takram Dhritva tu Sarvan Atati Jalanidish Chakrapaner Mukunda. Mukunda, who is Chakrapani, who wields the discus in his hand, has to now search for his milky ocean. Now what should he do? he takes a mixture of buttermilk in his hand and goes to every ocean. So as to see wherever when he sprinkles, if the ocean turns curdy, then that is the Milky Ocean. Sarvan Uttunga Shailan Dahati Pashupati Phalanetrena Pashyan. And all mountains have been turned into Kailasa. All mountains are white in color. So what does Shiva do? He opens his third eye and sees which mountain melts from the fire of his third eye. Whatever melts is the snowy mountain, and that is his residence. Vyapta Tvatkirti Kanta Trijagati Nipate Bhojaraja Kshitindra. So the whole world, the whole universe is now covered by your fame, O great king Bhoja. The third verse, I'll end with this third verse. This is a very beautiful verse, and this has been adapted into the Kannada movie Kaviratna Kalidasa. So, Vidvadraja Shikhamane Tulayitum Dhata Tvadiyam Yashak Kailasam Cha Niriksha Tatra Laghutam Nikshiptavan Purtaye Ukshanam Tadupari Yuma Sahacharam Tanmurtni Gangajalam Tasyagre Phanipungavam Tadupari Sparam Sudadiditi. Now, the creator wanted to measure how much of fame Bhojaraja has, how much his fame weighs. So when you want to weigh things, you put them on a balance. So on one side, the creator has put Bhoja's fame, and on the other side, he is adding weights on one top of another. Here, there is a particular sequence already present, but the poet gives as if this sequence is there only for this sake, only for the sake of measuring the weight of Bhoja's Kirti. So what did the creator do? On one side he took Bhojaraja's fame, on the other side he first put Kailas. To measure white, he has to take white things. So what does he do? He first puts Kailasa, which is white in color. But then he sees that the Bhoja's fame weighs more than Kailasa. So what does he do? Laghutam Drishtva, seeing that it doesn't weigh up to Bhoja's Yashas, what does he do? On that he puts Nandi, who is white in color. So even then he finds that Bhoja's fame weighs much more. So on the top of Nandi, what does he do? He places Shiva. Shiva is also Spatika Samkasha, he is also white in color. Even then he finds that it is no match. So then what he does? He puts the moon on top of Shiva, which is also white. Even then he finds that the two don't match. Then he places the white river Ganga there. Even then there is no match. And finally what he does? He puts Phanipungava, he puts Adishesha, the snake. The snake is also the ornament of Shiva, so it's also on his matted locks. So on top of everything he places the white snake. It's a white snake. Adishesha is a white snake. So this sequence is, we all know that on Kailasa there is Shiva, there is this bull, on the bull there is Shiva, on Shiva there is the moon, on the there is also the white river Ganga. All this we know, but then to link it all up to the Yashas is the Pratibha of the poet. So with these few verses, I end the afternoon session. Thank you. Huh? This is a Kavyalinga Alankara basically. So he is giving a poetic justification for something that is already there.